Hi, I'm Lauren, compulsive eater, weigh and measure 3 meals a day off the gray sheet, turn them over to my sponsor. I thank the gods for the willingness to not eat one day at a time. Abstinence is my floor, no matter how depressed, anxious, happy, whatever, going down, rabbit hole over some issue du jour. I got a floor, I just don't end up going below it, so I am so grateful. I have to tell you, I'm nervous. Thank you for everybody being on this meeting. It's really exciting. And thanks, Sarah, for asking me. I haven't qualified in a while, but I qualify. Let's talk about where I'm coming from. I grew up in Florida, where being overweight and having frizzy hair is not ideal, and pale. I was one of those that had been a compulsive eater from the get-go. I can remember one of my first memories, and my memories tend to be very visual, exactly where I was. And my mother, who's a bit of a narcissist, definitely controlling, and a super neat freak, had sent me outside in the backyard to eat the cold stuff in my little underwear, because God forbid it should melt in the house. And my father, who loved taking pictures, was trying to take a picture of me because I look really cute. And I remember thinking, get out of my face, leave me alone with my food, And I also, we had a duck pond nearby, and we take the stale food to go feed the ducks. And the only way I knew that food wasn't okay is because we were taking it. That meant the adults weren't eating it. Caveat, I learned ducks aren't good with staphylife, but these ones seem to thrive. So I loved this stuff. So I wasn't allowed to carry the bag because I would start eating. And another memory is we used to get snacks in these big cans delivered. And there was a particular salty one, old curly Q. And I would go through and eat just the nubs off of them because they were like the most burnt, toasty ones. I mean, I'd go through and eat them off. And I remember my sister one time was taking them out and she goes, "Oh my God, these don't have nubs on them." Ha. Anyways, my eating buddies started dropping off one by one. I remember this one, must have been in 12 years old, and I went home with a friend from school, and we'd be watching the soap operas this close to the TV and eating a snack. And I remember just, fixated on the soap opera. And all of a sudden I realized my friend is wrapping up, it was a sleeve of things that we were eating that was part of a box. And she's wrapping up, and I'm thinking to myself, why is she wrapping it up? It's not finished. And it was like I came face to face with somebody who was satiated. That was not my experience. Those things controlled it. I had no control. So that was probably the first year I started dieting. My mother putting me on diets, because it's also time when, got interested in boys. I was, look back and it wasn't that overweight, but I seemed to be bigger, size 13, whatever, 14. I mean, for me, it was huge, because I was bigger than other people. And, I'd use drugs, cigarettes, and drinking is also part of my story. But whatever I could to try and not eat, lots of diets. And around 16, I figured out it was easier to not eat than to eat. Because the minute I put something in my mouth, it started up. I didn't know at that time that's what would happen. And I did notice already that we'd go to a big dinner and everybody be like, and it was true for them. They'd not be eating in like another 48 hours. And I'm thinking, why am I still hungry? And so I started a period. It was my fake anorexic period. Only time I've had anorexic thoughts is when I start losing weight, and it's like more, but I was never been a real anorexic, and I started binging and starving. That was the way I tried to control it. And I'm 16, I imagine all my favorite food with vermin on it. And I lived in Florida, so it wasn't hard to manage, think of roaches and all sorts of stuff. It was like behavior modification. I'd write in my little journals, berate myself if I ate anything. And I remember some new product had come out. I remember I was like in 12th grade and I had binged on it. And underground, hiding, oh yeah, bad, because before I could drive, I couldn't replace food. Just all sorts of things, family kind of, my father, push yourself away from and how you looked was preeminent in my family, preeminent. So I had binged on this stuff. I had such stomach pains. I was at school, and I remember going to the school's office, and my mother came and took me to the emergency room because they thought I had appendicitis. I mean, I was not telling them I had just binged on this particular product.
10
Anyways,
minutes left, Lauren. 10.
okay, great. So fast forward, more of that, go to college, whatever, doing weird eating, trying to control. So here I am. I'm living in Boston area. Oh, that was one of the things. When I came up north, I thought these people are so much smarter. They probably have a way of controlling this. And I remember I took this group called Feeding Ourselves, and the idea was you were supposed to figure out what you were humming for. Not, you walk through by a bakery and it would come, none of this, beckoning you, humming. And I remember we were supposed to bring in our favorite food to eat mindfully. I had to think, what's my favorite food? It was like the first thing that came to mind. And I realized I did not like eating it slowly. I liked the rush, the getting it, everything. So needless to say, it didn't work. So I had been in my friends, I was probably 29 at the time, and I was my first friend in life's wedding. And, here I'm thinking I'm a spinster and I'm in my friend's wedding. And of course, they're thinking of me and I'm my little wedding, my bridesmaid desk. And I had like dieted like this. I went to a weight loss clinic with something you had to really pay for. And I finished grad school, supposed to be getting a job, and I basically had to diet full time. I wasn't getting a job. So I would go to this weight loss clinic, stay in it as long as I could in the waiting room reading magazines, because I had to, control myself. Anyways, I get to this wedding. I took my first bite. It was like the dragon was away, alive. It just came out. I could feel the seams going on my little dress. I get back to Boston and I think, oh, and I had a therapist. I couldn't afford a therapist, but I was going to my friend's therapist. And this is what would happen in therapy. I'd tell him how much I hated myself. I was depressed. And, and I occasionally talked about, I'm fat. And so I remember the theory was if you figure out, mom, dad, background, if you got your head together, and then the weight would take care of itself. And the worst is it was getting worse and the eating was getting worse. I figured I must be getting worse based on that approach. And I had this therapist. Oh, I loved her. But she happened to say, but I started talking about the food because this was the time I was dieting full time. So that was always on my mind. And she said, Lauren, sometimes when I overeat, I just go upstairs and, put my finger in my throat. I had tried that. It didn't work. Anyways, before she told me, but she told me that she had a client that came to her a couple of times and said to her, I know something, this thing called ERS Anonymous. And the client left because it was helping her with food. So I, desperate, I called this ERS Anonymous. I mean, the name of it is disgusting, but I was desperate. And at the time, and here I am like near Cambridge, I am, it's like an answering machine, a service. I mean, it's, she answers for doctors, she answers for lawyers, she answers for, and so she answers. And my therapist had said that her client had gone to these blue sheet meetings. So the woman heard, the person answering the phone was supposed to ask where you're living and tell you the closest meeting. And I'm like, but I have to go to a blue sheet meeting. Finally, she got me off the phone and I go to my first meeting. Oh my God, if I gotten abstinent then, I would have had such a pink cloud. Here was people who knew me, ate out of trash cans, went outside with their bathrobes and coats on in the middle of the night to go through drive-throughs and get tons of food and one Diet Coke, telling the person, I'm having a party, it was for me. Did the weirdest things. I was closer to them than anybody in my family. And it was powerful. And I learned that this is an addiction. I learned when I put this food in my mouth, it started up a physical addiction to it and a mental obsession that I would lose. And it talked about it being a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual condition that I had. And it started with the food. And I spent lots of years in OA trying it every day, 3 meals, nothing in between, went to these mini treatment things. I was
5
failing.
minutes left. 5.
Okay, so fast forward, I started in 1983 in OA, trying it different ways. It wasn't working for me. And one by one, friends started, we call it crossing the river because Boston is, there's a river runs through it, Cambridge with GRA Sheet was on the other side. People who were failing started one by one going to GRA Sheet, which was a horror. I heard they're Nazis, they're all orange, from the orange fruit, vegetable. They weigh and measure in restaurants. Oh, who knew? I have a really good friend. She'd wave the GRA Sheet in front of me. She goes, "This is the answer." And I'd go, "You can wave that in front of me all you want. If I don't have the willingness, I ain't eating it." But I crawled in, and this was 2000. And I got married 2001 aside, right before 9/11, September 9th. Anyways, long story short, it's 2001. Our honeymoon was postponed, 2002. I had the biggest fight with my husband before we got back because we had been in Italy and France. I was trying to do the weighing and measuring without exception in restaurants. Good luck. I needed to get away from him so I could get the food. I ended up going to GRA Sheet. I got abstinent right away. Could not believe it. And because of the food plan, the obsession started to go. And I was like, I couldn't believe, I was waiting for the shoe to drop and it didn't drop. And I had friends that would help me, people I met in GRA Sheet, show me how to weigh and measure in restaurants. I wasn't one of these, F you, love me, love my scale. I was kind of like a shy person doing it. Anyways, 2004, I'm abstinent. And this is like the second or third time came because I wasn't willing to open my mouth because I was, found out what kind of fear I had right underneath everything. Someone took, and this was the straw that took my food, out of my big 3 raws at work, just kind of grabbed some of it. And I go back to my office and I started eating. And I thought, maybe I should call my sponsor. And I tell her the next day. And since I had done sort of weird things before, and it all came around not being willing to tell somebody, no, you can't eat this. She put me back to day 1. So I had 2002 to 2004. I got abstinent right away. Usually I thought, let me go to the big box store and binge for a while and then get back on. I wanted abstinence. Who knew this was the easier, softer way? So PS, 20 years, no matter what. My father died suddenly. My husband died suddenly. I've had my thyroid removed. I've had dental work. I've traveled to Africa, New Zealand, Peru. I've been abstinent through it all. I'm retired. I get to volunteer my favorite gigs, abstinent. And mentally, emotionally, I have done work outside of GRA Sheet because I love GRA Sheet. First half of step 1. If I ask anything more from GRA Sheet, all I need is not to eat no matter what. But I get so much more. And I've worked the big book in many ways. The 12 steps is really nice. I've done some other things. And I'm here to tell you, at least my experience, all you need is a willingness, a desire to not eat no matter what. You can be any religion, any sex, any of the 5 options. You can be awakened. It doesn't matter. I'd say
1 minute.
Thank you. A spiritual agnostic. I heard that recently at a meeting, but I am so grateful for today for the willingness not to eat no matter what. And it is willingness. And I need the fellowship and I need, to do the tools. I'm incredibly weak on the telephone. It's finding out what's underneath all that. A lot of self-hate, did a lot. And this overnight, I became thin compared to the rest of the emotional and spiritual work I've had to do. Depression's been a big part of my story. And for today, I'm okay. And I am so grateful for you because fellowship rocks. And that's it for me.